All right. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome Nick Marchese, the Director of Academic and Strategic Technology at the Emma Willard School, and also the founder of Collar City Consulting. So he is a seasoned educator with technology professional with over 15 years of experience, and he is based in upstate New York. Nick specializes in developing bespoke digital solutions, leveraging his experience as a Google Apps script specialist. He is uniquely qualified at enhancing organizational workflows, automating manual processes, and streamlining data synchronization to solve unique challenges. He is extremely excited to be with you today and share some of these things that he's been working on. So I will let you take it from here, Nick.
Thank you so much. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. Today's topic is going to be called Data Without Detours, building a direct Sky API to Looker Studio connection. I see some familiar names in the crowd here, so it's nice to have you with us again. This is going to be a very different session than some of my earlier sessions, but for those of us who weren't there before, earlier today I had a session on using the query API with RE and FE, getting started with AppScript, and how to with syncing advanced lists using Sky API into Google Sheets. So here's our agenda for today. A little bit about me. I'm going to talk about the current data journey and its pain points. Talk about the Google's custom connector framework, a little bit about building the bridge, and then some next steps. So today's focus is on showing what's possible and inspiration rather than like deep technical implementation. A little bit about me. So I've been using Google AppScript for over, I think, 12 something years now for solving school problems, but also non-school problems. The Director of Academic and Strategic Tech at the Emma Willard School, and then the founder of Collar City Consulting. And today we're going to go ahead and dive in. All right. So part one, the current data journey. So I'm going to put in here as a disclaimer that I did not put in some of my other sessions. I do not have all the answers for this one. So I'm going to share some of the things that I've discovered and some things that are working to an extent. I don't have a full-blown template file or anything like that to share with you today, but we will go over some code snippets and mostly talk about the architecture of the entire thing. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I will do my best to answer them. And Lori, yes, Looker Studio is the rebranded version of Data Studio. Okay. So this data detour problem. So the current path, depending on what you're doing, could be your data originating and starting in Blackbaud, and then either pulling it out manually and just dumping it out, and it being I'll call it a dumb data, right, where you've got just a downloaded file, or connecting it with Google Sheets into Looker Studio. And for our goal today to explore is how we can make a quote-unquote direct connection from Blackbaud directly into Looker Studio using their community connectors. So that way we can hopefully minimize the places where problems can occur. All right. So why this could matter. So without Sky API, you're going to have your manual exports are going to be time consuming and error prone. Your data is going to be stale, reports based off of last week's export versus this week's export. There's lots of steps, lots of pain points for failure, and it's limited in its automation. So someone has to remember to go in, manually download it, update it, and move on from there. With Sky API Sheets, you have an automated data refresh. So like you can automatically have that data going in. So if you came to any of my sessions earlier today, we talked a lot about this. But you still have to use Google Sheets as a bit of a middleman, a little middleware there. It can also add some complexity for end users to get this set up. and the data structure is a little bit more limited by the spreadsheet format, depending on what you're trying to get out. And then the goal for today, again, like the middle column is, I know there's a lot of yellow there, is a very good solution, and it's much better than the without Sky API solution. But for the thought experiment that we're going to be focusing on today, it's what would it look like for a direct connection? So you get your real-time data flow, keeping it automated. There's no intermediate steps. So it's native to the Looker Studio experience, so you don't have to go outside anywhere. It's just built in directly. It's professional looking because it's integrated right there. So we talked a little bit about this briefly a second ago. So the current options and workarounds, so you have those manual exports. Option 2 is my current solutions that are available via my website, where you connect Sky API directly to Google Sheets via a script or an add-on, and then dump that into Looker Studio. You can just give up and use static manual data exports, or again, our goal for today, try and make a custom connection. Okay, so enter the Google Custom Connector Framework. So Google has a lot of documentation on building custom connectors. So I am by no means the expert on this. This is going to be a little bit more high level, so I'll drop some links into the chat later for you to go ahead and check out those documentations. But the goal here is that a custom connector acts as a bridge or a translator between any API, not just Blackbaud's API, and Looker Studio. We're handling authentication within the connector, we're fetching data, we're formatting, we're doing all those pieces. If you were to go into Looker Studio today and go to add data, or add a data source, most times we're just clicking and doing something like Sheets or from another common source, but you'll see there are lots of custom connectors out there, and that's what we're focusing on today. All right, so how they work, right? So they're connecting from an external API to the connector to Looker Studio. Their key functions are authenticating with that external API or the external service, defining what the data schema is. So what is the data going to look like? What should it look like? What are the fields that we should be looking for and worrying about? And then actually fetching and processing that data and then keeping that up to date. So why it's perfect for Sky API is that we can go ahead and directly connect to the data. We can make the integration feel natural. It can handle the authentication with OAuth 2 on the back end. It's scalable, so that way you create the connection, or you create the connector, and whoever you share that connector with can use that within the Looker Studio environment. And you eliminate your spreadsheet solutions. Again, totally reasonable solution that works very well. It's just, if you're looking to try something different, this is something different. Okay, the technical foundation. So for my example, it's built on Google Apps Script, which is hosting the connector logic, the OAuth authentication, OAuth 2 authentication to create that secure connection with Blackbaud, data schema mapping, so to map the Blackbaud fields that you're getting into the Looker Studio fields. And then adding a bunch of error handling because this is a complex task that we are tackling. These are just the building blocks to get things going. So let's talk a little bit about the key components here. And I'm sure I won't fill the entire time for us today, but I'm happy to answer questions as we go or at the end. So authentication. Lots of things that I'm going to show here are found in resources that I have used across the web from other folks who have made some really great documentation and videos and walkthroughs and blog posts. So this is some ways that I've used it and manipulated those pieces for my testing. So the challenge is connecting securely to Sky. So the solution is that the connector is handling that authentication internally. So that way they're just providing the credentials through like a configuration form or something like that, and entering them during setup. So here's a little code snippet. So the custom connector documentation talks about a function called getAuthType, where you can choose between none or OAuth2 or some other stuff, and you need to define that here. So here's just one piece that is essential to having that in there. And when we say credentials, the thing that we're talking about is your Blackbaud developer app ID or client ID, your app secret, and your subscription key. So those pieces that are fundamental to making an API call are the credentials that we're talking about here. All right, I'm going to take a sip of water. All right, component 2 is the data schema. So how do we map the Blackbaud fields to the Looker Studio format? So we need to define what that schema looks like in Looker Studio, right? Student first name as a string field, and what it should look like, what the label is, what the name is, what the data type is. And as you know from Looker, there's a couple of different data types, but this way you can go ahead and articulate what fields you should be expecting when connecting this, right? So if you're connecting, you say, I'm expecting student first name, student last name, and phone number to define that within the data schema. And again, there's other documentation stuff here. I just want to kind of try and paint the picture, tell the story on how it connects together. And data processing. So Blackbaud data requests can be huge, thousands of rows. So pagination handling, how to go ahead and deal with the fact that you might have more than 100 or 1,000 responses that you want to be going ahead and pulling in here. So how a lot of the Sky API endpoints work is they're paginated, so that way you have to go ahead and cycle through each page if they have more than, let's say, 1,000 rows of data. So here's a little snippet of some code that is a way for you to go ahead and see, is there more data within the Blackbaud request that I'm making? And if there is, we need to go to the next page. So you keep on turning that page in that book until all of a sudden it's blank, and then you know you're done with your data. So you don't need to think about pagination just yet. Like you just got to focus on like a small, easy call. But I do want to call out that this is a piece. So the data processing part of all of this is when you're actually going ahead and making the call, the Sky API call, and taking the data, bringing it down, and getting it ready to be put into the Looker report. All right. And then the user config. So we need a way to capture the API credentials and the endpoint details. So maybe this is all hard-coded. Maybe this is just for you. Maybe you put all of this in directly into the code. But maybe you need to make it a little more flexible for somebody else. So there's different places where you can go ahead and add in when you're making a new connector to request information from the user by adding fields to that little pop-up when you're saying, I want to connect this data source, where you can go ahead and do that. And this can also update your refresh frequency, your API credentials, whatever it is. And you're just trying to make it potentially make it available and easy for somebody on the front end, whereas the easier you want to make it on the front end, the harder it is to make it on the back end. Okay, so a little bit about the development process, right? So set up your app script file, and again, all of these resources, I'll actually drop them in the chat right now, so that way you can click those and hopefully continue to listen to me at the same time. Implementing the authentication flow, defining that data schema, and then building that data fetching logic. So a little bit about what this looks like. So here's a bunch of code. I know there's some stuff here. So some of the stuff we already talked about. So a way to simplify the authentication in some way, right? So the users enter their credentials, you're collecting it, and then they only have to enter it one time, and then the connector's handling the rest. So to kind of talk through a couple of these pieces, which if you've been in some of my other sessions are repeats, and I apologize. Starting on the left side, so you need to create a service with OAuth2. So you need to use, what I've done is use the OAuth2 library from Google. So that way you can create a service where you're passing in the auth URL, the token, URL, all these pieces that are predefined via Blackbaud's documentation. And then you have a function called auth callback request. So that way it sees, is it authorized? Is it not authorized to access this data? And then the right side is some more specific Looker Studio data or code where we talked about the get auth type, where we're returning that it's none, mostly because we don't need Looker Studio to be dealing with that. We have the OAuth 2 connection to be handling the authentication piece, the OAuth 2 library. And then this get config, this is that place where I said you can have that pop up where you can request data from the user when they're setting up the connection, right? So you're saying, can you enter your app ID and your secret in these text input fields, and then they get stored in variables and I can reuse them later? Thanks. Right, so that way you can make it flexible. If you're saying, I'm just literally making this for myself, you don't have to worry about that. You just don't. You could just hard code it all in the back end. But if you're looking to make this for somebody else, you want it to be a little bit more flexible, this is the way to do it. All right. So we talked a little bit about the data schema earlier on, where it tells Looker Studio what fields are available and what one should appear in the report. So this get schema. So I'm not just like naming these functions, get config, get auth type, get schema. These are functions that Looker Studio is expecting and looking for. And you'll see that if you look through their documentation. So here's an example of it's saying I'm expecting student name and GPA to be data that should be coming at me. So that way it's predefined. It's creating this dictionary that between Blackbaud and Sky API and Looker Studio to handle these data conversions. And then some data fetching here within. So again, that's function get data. This is a predefined function that the community connector is looking for. So to quickly kind of go through this, so we have a request that we pass through, which is basically the Looker Studio report just running. We have an API URL, which is the endpoint. In this example, it's courses, saying I want to hit the school endpoint and look for courses. And then store in a response variable using the URL fetch app that's built into Google Apps Script to fetch or call that API endpoint, pass it my access token, which I've gotten because I've done all the other steps, and my subscription key, which I've stored somewhere, which is from your Blackbaud developer page. And then it will hopefully return the data of what's needed into a variable and then pass it back to the report. And keeping in mind, again, that larger amounts of data, it's a little bit trickier to do. Smaller amounts of data, it's going to be easier to do, mostly because of the way that Sky API is dealing with larger pagination requests. Okay, so what this setup enables you, right, for end users, potentially making it look like a native data source. You don't really have to train people on it. You kind of just say, go ahead, click this thing, get going. Real-time data without the technical knowledge of setting it all up. Self-service report creation. That way they can just say, oh, I'm going to start this again. I want to use this endpoint. That also comes with a lot of risk, right? Because you're giving folks access to data. For organizations, you can make it scalable so that multiple folks can use it or make those data definitions really consistent. Or for your teams, right, making a single point of integration maintenance, right? We only need to update this integration rather than these other 4 other pieces that we're doing. And it's extensible to other Blackbaud modules, right? So not just education management, but literally any of the endpoints and modules that are available within the Blackbaud umbrella. All right, some next steps here. These are the links that I dropped in the chat. So I hope that you find them helpful. You'll see some of them are similar, some of them are different. And it's kind of like anything else when you do it. You have to go ahead and work and solve the problem. But I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out these complex details so you maybe don't have to as much. You can start working on your own, or you can, reach out and we can go ahead and fast track you with some of the solution that I've been working on. So the other piece that I wanted to note is if you're going to do this, try building something really simple with sample data that you know is manageable. Really get acquainted with the Google Connector documentation. There are some really great YouTube videos as well that they've put out there that really explain how this flows. And there's also a Looker Studio developer group along with the Sky API developer group that I highly recommend checking out. Or you can reach out to me and you could potentially get a working connector or like talk with me about like, hey, you know what, this isn't what I want, but I actually want to do this instead. Do you think we could do that thing? And then we can kind of talk about it together and see if it's attainable. Again, today, I don't have all the answers for you, but I'm hoping that I give you enough information, enough guidance to put you in the right direction. And if not, then we can have a conversation about a different way to connect. So I have some other pre-made solutions for education management, RE and FE for syncing lists and queries, as well as student checklists and enrollment management. If you're interested, please reach out, email me, or check out my website. You could also scan a QR for an interest form. I love to connect and hear from other people, even if it's not something that we need to be partnering on together. It's really great to just connect and learn who's out there. Right now, I basically just see myself on my slide and I don't actually see any of your faces. So I would love to learn a little bit more about you and what you're trying to accomplish more than anything else. I'll happily stick around for any questions that you might have. I will try and answer them as best I can. Other than that, we'll launch the survey here in a second while I try and answer some questions, if you're willing to answer that survey. Thank you. Evan asked the question. Thank you, folks, for coming. Thanks, Harold. Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, everybody. All right, Evan said the question. Thanks, Lauren. Looking at the get data function, do you create different connectors for different APIs? Great question. If you're trying to incorporate them all into one report, I would probably, because y'all can't see the Q&A. Evan asked, looking at the get data function, do you create different connectors for different API URLs, like gifts, constituents, courses, etc.? I think if you were to want to incorporate multiple endpoints into a single report, you would probably have to create different connectors. I think a different way around that would be you make a connector that is flexible enough where you can add in the endpoint that define the endpoint that you're using during the config process. So that way you're essentially just reusing the same base connection, but then just appending the end. I haven't done that myself. I don't know if it would work. I think in theory it does, because I think you could add a connector multiple times. But again, don't quote me on that. But it's a really interesting problem to try. Hopefully that answered your question, Evan. Awesome. And Kathleen, whenever you're set to launch that survey while folks kind of wrap up here, I'll happily just hang out and see what other questions been. Awesome. And Evan, if you want to reach out at any point, I'd love to just chat and brainstorm and see what you're thinking about. And maybe I can help, maybe I can't. Maybe we could just talk about it over a hot cup of tea. Awesome. I hope that this is a good way to end some of your day today, and I really hope that I hear from some of you and get to look forward to connecting. So thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Nick. Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining. I will go ahead and launch that survey here. So please respond if you have a little bit of time, and I hope you guys have a great afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, you too.
Thanks.